Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hooked on Movies podcast. Today, we will be looking at the 1991 epic political thriller JFK, directed by Oliver Stone. With me are Ted.
Well, they've been doing it all through history. Kings are killed, Mr. Garrison. Politics is power, nothing more.
And Ken.
That dog don't hunt.
And I'm Eric. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. Great line there by Joe Pesci. And of course, we are talking about JFK. Ted, give us the details of this movie.
All right, so JFK was directed by Oliver Stone. It has a screenplay by Oliver Stone and Zachary Sklar. It's based off of two separate novels, On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison and Crossfire, The Plot to Kill Kennedy by Jim Mars. It has a running time of 205 minutes. That's the director's cut. It was released December 20th, 1991. It had a budget of $40 million, and it had a box office gross of $205.4 million. This is a wow sort of a cast, so bear with me, guys, because this is going to take a bit. So we have Kevin Costner as Jim Garrison, Kevin Bacon as Willie O'Keefe, Tommy Lee Jones as Clay Shaw / Clay Bertrand, Laurie Metcalf as Susie Cox, Gary Oldman as Lee Harvey Oswald, Michael Rooker as Bill Broussard, J.O. Sanders as Lou Ivan, Sissy Spacek as Liz Garrison, Joe Pesci as David Ferry, Beata Pozniak as Marina Oswald, Jack Lemmon as Jack Martin, Walter Matthau as Senator Russell B. Long, Donald Sutherland as Mr. X, Ed Asner as Guy Bannister, Brian Doyle Murray as Jack Ruby, John Candy as Dean Andrews, Sally Kirkland as Rose Shirame, Wayne Knight as Numa Bartel, Pruitt Taylor Vince as Lee Bowers, Tony Plania as Carlos Beignet, Vincent D'Onofrio as Bill Newman, Dale Dye as General Y, Lolita Davidovich as Beverly Oliver, Ellen McElduff as Jean Hill, John Larroquette as Jerry Johnson, Willem Altmans as George D. DeMornshield, William Omans as George DeMornshield, Thomas Milan as Leopoldo, Gary Grubbs as Al Oser, Ron Rifkin as Mr. Goldberg, Peter Maloney as Colonel Fink, John Finnegan as Judge Haggerty, Wayne Tippett as FBI Agent Frank, Joe Anderson as Julianne Mercer, Bob Gunton as the news anchor, Frank Whaley as the imposter Oswald, and the man himself, Jim Garrison, as Chief Justice Earl Warren.
And Jerry Mathers as the Beaver.
Yeah, exactly. Quite a cast.
Ted, tell us what the critics thought of this movie. I'm sure there's some positives and negatives to go around.
Oh, yes, that's for sure. On Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of certified fresh at 85%. It has an audience score of 88%. Now, when it comes to our critics, I'm going to take a little bit from both negative and the positive. Start with the negatives and give a little bit of information and then talk about the positive critics. And there's some information about them, too. Nothing here is without controversy. So we'll take Jonathan Rosenbaum from the Chicago Reader. He had to say, it's sad to say Oliver Stone's 3 hours of bombast did little to raise the level of discussion. I sincerely disagree with that. At the very least, there's discussion to be had.
What planet is this guy on? The whole movie is controversy.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So, Vincent Canby of the New York Times, he said, the film's insurmountable problem is the vast amount of material it fails to make coherent sense of. So, on the negative critic side, there was a lady by the name of Pat Dowell. She was a veteran critic for the Washington Post. She had a 34-word review for the January issue of the paper that was rejected by the copy editor. He didn't want a positive review for the film that he regarded as treacherous. So Dow resigned in protest. So the Washington Post actually censored their own veteran movie critic.
Damn, how about
over
that?
this. Yeah.
Wow.
And then on the positive critic side, we'll take Peter Travers from Rolling Stone. As speculation, JFK is riveting. As proof, it's bunk. Stone has turned what he considers the crime of the century into a disturbing anomaly, a dishonest search for the truth. And then Roger Ebert from the Chicago Sun-Times said, Stone's film is hypnotically watchable. Leaving aside all of its drama and emotion, it is a masterpiece of film assembly. The writing, the editing, the music, the photography are all used here in a film of enormous complexity to weave a persuasive tapestry out of an overwhelming mountain of evidence and testimony. Film students will examine this film in wonder in the years to come, astonished at how much information it contains, how many characters, how many interlocking flashbacks, and what skillful interweaving of documentary and fictional footage.
Do you know, I know high school kids in the 90s and early 2000s that were actually watching this movie in high school as part of their political science and history classes.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
So Roger Ebert wasn't immune from being criticized for his review. Shortly after the film's release, film critic Roger Ebert received a tongue lashing from Walter Cronkite, berating him for praising this movie. Cronkite was adamant that there wasn't a shred of truth to the film, but the film eventually is listed in Roger Ebert's great movies list. He also said that this was the best movie of 1991. So yeah, even Walter Cronkite had the guns out for Roger Ebert on this one.
Interesting.
Oliver Stone, I think he knew what he was doing, but boy, he laid the atomic bomb of all movies with this one.
I know that many op-ed pieces in the Tribune, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, I think the New York Post has some very negative things to say about this movie while it was being created.
They were absolutely trashing. I mean, they did a lot of the same things that the same papers did to Jim Garrison when he was leading up to the trial of Clay Shaw.
Yeah. From day one, this movie has been reeked with controversy, which is very interesting. Make this podcast just very interesting to talk about. And Ken, let's get into the plot of this movie so people know what the hell we're talking about.
Well, November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy is killed allegedly by Lee Harvey Oswald, who is then later killed by Jack Ruby. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison and his team investigate potential New Orleans links to the JFK assassination, but their investigation is publicly rebuked by the federal government and Garrison closes the investigation. But the investigation is reopened in 1966 after Garrison reads the Warren Report and notices what he believes to be multiple inaccuracies. Garrison and his staff interrogate people involved with Oswald and David Ferry. One such witness is Willie O'Keefe, a male prostitute serving 5 years in prison for soliciting sex. Willie says he witnessed Ferry talking about assassinating the president as well as meeting Oswald, and romantically was involved with a man called Clay Bertrand. Garrison and his team theorize Oswald was an agent for the intelligence agency and was framed for the assassination. In 1967, Garrison and his team talked to several witnesses to the Kennedy assassination, including Jean Hill, a teacher who says she witnessed a gunman shooting from the grassy knoll, but the Secret Service threatened her into saying the 3 shots came from the book depository, and her testimony was altered by the Warren Commission. Garrison's staff also test-fired an empty rifle from the Texas School Book Depository from which Oswald was alleged to have shot Kennedy, and conclude that Oswald was too poor of a marksman to make the shots, indicating that more than one shooter was involved. Garrison comes to believe New Orleans-based international businessman Clay Shaw, who is also Clay Bertrand. When Shaw is interrogated, the businessman denies any knowledge of meeting Ferry, O'Keefe, or Oswald. Key witnesses Ruby and Ferry die under suspicious circumstances.
Jack Ruby didn't die under circumstances. He died in prison of health conditions.
Of quote-unquote cancer. Yeah.
And he just happened to go crazy before that. Because the doctor that was with him before he started getting sick was actually one of those mind control doctors.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ultra.
Yeah.
No.
Before his death, Ferry tells Garrison that he believes people are after him and there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. Garrison meets with a high-level figure in Washington, D.C., who doesn't give his name. We'll call him Mr. X. He suggests the CIA, the Mafia, the military-industrial complex, Secret Service, FBI, and Kennedy's Vice President Johnson as co-conspirators are having motives to cover up the truth of the assassination. He also suggests that Kennedy was killed because he wanted to pull the United States out of the Vietnam War and dismantle the CIA. He encourages Garrison to keep digging and prosecute Shaw. Shaw is soon charged with conspiring to murder the president. Some of Garrison's staff begin to doubt his motives and disagree with his methods and leave the investigation. Garrison's marriage is strained when his wife Liz complains that he is spending more time on the case than with his own family. She accuses Garrison of being selfish and attacking Shaw only because he's a homosexual. In addition, the media launches attacks on television and in the newspapers, attacking Garrison's character and criticizing the way the office has been spending the taxpayers' money. The trial of Clay Shaw takes place in 1969. Garrison presents the court with the single bullet theory, proposing a scenario involving 3 assassins firing 6 shots and framing Oswald for the murderers, but only for the jury to acquit Shaw. The end.
Great. Well, that sums it up pretty well, Ken. Thank you for that plot. Let's talk about the first time we actually saw this movie. We'll kick it off with Ted.
This isn't one that I would have been able to see in the movie theater. I was still too young. However, I knew about the movie, of course, right when it came out on VHS to rent. My dad and I would have rented it and watched it. But as far as like Kennedy himself, it was part of my life growing up. Like my dad was always very open and honest about where he was and what he was doing and what he felt on November 22nd. He was actually in class. They sent people home from school. He was in high school. He was always very open and honest about that, especially when it came to, we were discussing earlier before we started recording, about the 25th anniversary, which would have been in 1988. I distinctly remember that being a big deal. Kennedy was always a big deal in my house. So this is always something that's always been around for me.
Okay. How about you, Ken?
I saw it when it was released on video. What I remember is the box being bigger. I'm not sure if there was more than one VHS tape in there.
Yeah, it was a double VHS.
Yeah, it was a double VHS.
But I do remember the big box. Renting it from, I believe it was probably one of the local video stores at my house, and watching it at home. What I remember most about watching it at home is not where my parents talked about where they were when Kennedy got shot, but what happened when Bobby Kennedy got shot. My mom actually said the word brothers before Jim Garrison's wife actually said brothers in the film, and then I thought, wow, that was kind of like really cool, because that's what my mom thought when Bobby Kennedy was killed, was brothers. She said that was the first thing that went into her head when the brothers are gone. It meant a lot more, I think, to my mom than it did to my dad that the Kennedys died. I don't think my dad really cared much.
Okay. For me, I also watched this one on VHS, and I actually remember kind of the basic time frame when I watched this movie. I was first year in college, so it was late 93, early 94. I rented it at a local Blockbuster, sat down and watched it, and was just entranced at that time watching this movie. And the rest, we say, is history. So we're moving on here. As Ted mentioned, we have a who's who of characters in this, played by just an array of actors and actresses of this era and past eras that have come into play in this movie. And it's just an incredible cast that Oliver Stone has assembled to talk about this movie. I know he talked about getting Ed Asner involved, getting Walter Matthau, Jack Lemmon involved on this movie. He was really, really thrilled to get these people, these studio actors of the last 50 years in some incredible movies involved in this.
It's amazing that he was able to assemble this cast the way he did, and for them to all be not worried about attaching their name to a movie that was definitely going to cause controversy. It's amazing. You have a lot of people acting against type as well. You have Brian Doyle Murray playing Jack Ruby, and you have John Candy playing Andrews. John Candy was an SCTV guy from Canada, and Brian Doyle Murray was a Second City Chicago alum. These are comedians that are playing against type. They're playing a serious role. It almost makes me wish we would have seen more from John Candy playing a serious type role. Because he does really good here.
He was nervous as hell doing this role. He was sweating bullets, and that was natural. That was not for the movie, as you think it would be, in an unconditioned New Orleans restaurant. He was nervous as hell, sweating bullets, and it just worked so well for the part.
He kept telling Oliver Stone that he didn't deserve to be on screen with Kevin Costner, Tommy Lee Jones, and Gary Oldman.
Serious actors.
Right, yeah. Serious. He goes, I have no place being on screen with them. And Oliver Stone had to continually tell him that, yeah, you do. You're a really good actor. So yeah, that's kind of sad, too, in a way, that he didn't feel that he was part of that. This is the only time where Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau star in a movie together, and they don't appear on screen together.
Yeah, because they did the Grumpy Old Men movies after this. Right.
And for somebody like Ed Asner, that's a real acting job. He's playing somebody who is just a vile human being. A John Birch Society, card-carrying...
Yeah, it doesn't get more right-wing than that, John Birch Society.
He's a menace to society. And he was a former FBI liaison in Chicago, amazingly enough. And that's Guy Bannister. And Ed Asner's like completely not that person, but he comes off very believable here. And coming out of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, everybody would have known Ed Asner from that. He's essentially playing out of character type as well. It's just an amazing collection of people.
Well, Ed Asner, if I believe, was also one of the many human beings that was involved in the Roots series on NBC.
Yes.
So,
definitely.
He had a very serious role in that, as did everyone. He was very good in it.
I mean, we see this already in Mary Tyler Moore and in Luke Grant. He could play a serious guy. I don't think this is much of a stretch for Asner than
I was more saying against his politics.
Oh, against his politics. That might be the case. I mean, that might be the case for a lot of people in this movie. But some of these performances that I like, that just stand out for me, is like Tommy Lee Jones as Clay Shaw. We're used to seeing Tommy Lee Jones as this man's man kind of guy. We see him in movies like Men in Black. He's a take charge kind of guy. And he's a take charge kind of guy here too, but he's playing a gay man. And he does it really well. Him and Kevin Bacon. Bacon steals the show whenever he talks. That scene where they're at the prison, he's just biting up the scenery. He's just really enjoying it. I mean, there's just so many good performances here. The only one that kind of makes me feel like it's not much of a performance is Joe Pesci. Joe Pesci almost sounds like, to me, like he's Leo Getz still in Lethal Weapon 2. And, I mean, there's a time where he says, they fuck you, I'm like, oh no, he's talking about the drive-through scene here in Lethal Weapon 2. It doesn't seem like it's much of a stretch from the last movie that he did. But everybody else here is pretty on point. Though I would say that Costner himself is kind of stale, which I think is basically how Costner is. We talk about caricatures of actors. I think Kevin Costner has been playing the same person for now 30 plus years.
I think he's stale in this movie. I think he played how Jim Garrison's mannerisms were naturally very well.
Maybe so, but here's the thing. We even listened to it. Me and Eric watched this movie together the other day, just for preparation for this podcast. And we noticed there were times where he loses his accent. Like all of a sudden, it's like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, where he sometimes has an English accent and sometimes he doesn't. And sometimes he has a Louisiana accent and sometimes he doesn't.
It's not as bad as Robin Hood.
No,
Prince
not as
bad. But here again, let's be perfectly honest. Everybody that's in this movie, and this is like we've just said, this is an amazing cast.
Tommy Lee Jones is nominated for supporting actor. Academy. Yeah.
Nobody in this movie has a good accent.
No.
I enjoy the accent of Walter Matthau. When I'm listening to him on the plane, that is awesome. In fact, I wish we would have had more Walter Matthau in this movie, because the way he was on the plane, it might have been my favorite character. I mean, him or John Candy's character were right up there as my favorite cameos in this movie, because
and Candy's accent was, if you listen to some of those Dean Andrew interviews, he's right on with the mannerisms and the language, and so is Walter Matthau as Huey Long. I mean, he is right on with that
Southern. He's not Huey Long. He's Russell Long. And
Russell Long. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, Huey Long had been long dead.
I was going to say I went 50 years in the past.
But interestingly enough, it's not his real life name. Most everybody else has used their real life names in this movie. But Senator Russell Long is who Walter Matthau plays. It's actually based off of a Louisiana senator named Hale Boggs. His story is very interesting and probably
And
could
Hale
get
Boggs
its
is
own...
on the Warren Commission.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
his story could be a movie all of its own. When coming out of the Warren Commission, he was one of the people who was adamantly against the findings of what came out of there and spoke up about it. And he was also a very huge critic of corruption in government. In 1972, he was in a plane that disappeared in Alaska. The plane's never been found.
There's been a
That's
lot
a
of
very
interesting deaths related to the JFK legacy, if you will, of related to this assassination. Witnesses, people affiliated with it. Yeah, it's a little,
And
little spooky.
Mr. X is not wrong. Jim Garrison, he's lucky that the spotlight was on him as great as it was, because they could have made him disappear real fast as well.
Very easily.
I would say this about Walter Matthau. It's funny, I was listening to Oliver Stone talk about the movie, and he says that Walter Matthau didn't even know who Kevin Costner was.
Right, right.
That
That's
Yeah,
right.
doesn't surprise me.
No clue whatsoever, but I guess they bonded a little bit over baseball.
Bad
It's
News
funny,
Bears.
Yeah, Bad News Bears, and of course with Costner, almost every single baseball movie made in the 80s and 90s, right? But this cast, like you said, it is a who's who of people. It's kind of funny because you even have like John Larroquette, who actually is cut, but he's on the extended scene. He kind of plays a Johnny Carson type of host. In fact, Garrison actually went on the Tonight Show, similar to what he does here in this movie, and had kind of the same type of response. It's interesting that someone like John Larroquette had to go on the cutting room floor because there's just so much here. It just tells you something about how many people wanted to be in this movie. Like you said, it's great. And then Donald Sutherland basically goes on his speech about the conspiracy, and the way he presents the conspiracy, it's enticing. You're focused on every word Donald Sutherland has to say. Perfect guy to kind of give that long speech. And from what I understood, I think this was only like a one-day shoot, and he basically learned everything about the situation beforehand and just let it all loose. Threw it up there and see what happens, because he was basically just talking to himself for a good 10 minutes.
And I know you guys like alternate casting, and I guess Marlon Brando turned Mr. X down. I'm kind of glad he did, because I think that he would have been more of a distraction than Donald Sutherland would have been.
And we talked about Marlon Brando in some of our other movies. We had just recently talked about him in The Exorcist, how he would take away from actually the movie itself and make it about him. I mean, we all know about Apocalypse Now. He was hard to work with. And we also hear that he was hard to work with.
Oh, The Island of Dr. Moreau. I thought you were talking
Yeah.
about The Last Tango in Paris.
I don't know if we'll ever review that movie, but
I hope not.
There's some problems with that movie. Like
Psychological
groundbreaking.
or otherwise.
Yeah, at the time people thought it was groundbreaking, but now people think, did we just watch rape?
Pretty much.
But I mean, it's a fun cast. Jack Lemmon is actually Jack Lemmon. I mean, to be honest with you, some of his mannerisms that he portrays in this movie are the same mannerisms he uses in Grumpy Old Men. I mean, you can't do this cast now. There's no way you're going to get this many stars together in one movie and suspend, let's say, their fee. Not stars of this magnitude.
They would have to get points off of the gross.
One of the big things about this movie that really strikes me as important, I think we can all agree, is the cinematography. The way Oliver Stone uses a blend, a mesh, if you will, of the cinematography of the current 1991 production and actual past footage of the time, how he uses it independently and how he meshes it together almost seamlessly for the era, where you almost have to watch it a second time to think, are you looking at Oswald or are you looking at Gary Oldman? It's almost that good at some points. As people know, I'm a huge cinematography nut, and this movie is just loaded with just incredible cinematography. Everything from your downtown Louisiana, your courthouse scenes. I think this movie might have been nominated for
It actually won.
cinematography. It won,
actually
thank
won
you.
for
Yes.
cinematography.
Yeah, so I'm not crazy, folks.
Not at this
Yeah,
moment, no.
Not at this moment in time,
No.
but other times maybe a little certifiable.
You're not Oswald crazy, at least.
Not
I'll
Oswald
give you that
crazy.
much. I will agree for the most part. There are some scenes, very minor here and there, that I'm like, you really didn't have to go there. Like the scene where they're in the actual car, Jackie and John, after he's gotten shot. It's off. She doesn't look anything like Jackie O, and it's just not needed. You should have probably at least done it black and white then to kind of mix it up a little bit better. But outside of that, I don't see any problems with it. I mean, you go back and forth from black and white, original footage to new footage. It's really well done. I wish they would have done more editing. Granted, 3 hours and 20 minutes is director's cut now. But even when this movie came out, it was pushing 3 hours. And
It was over 3 hours, I believe.
It was
Just a
3
hair.
hours and like 8 minutes.
it is long. I kind of agree with one of the reviewers when he says that it's a lot of information kind of thrown all at you, jumbled up, and you have to rewatch it over and over and over again to kind of almost make sense what's going on. Because they jump from one angle to another angle to another angle. It gets kind of confusing at times on who's who and what did what. If it wasn't for rewatching it multiple times, I probably would still be lost.
Any movie that's 3 hours long, you're going to have to watch more than once. There's no way you can absorb any 3-hour movie in one sitting, especially with this amount of information that's thrown at you. I'm sure that's a little bit of a take by Oliver Stone for multiple watches of the movie. What do you think, Ted?
I completely understand that we're talking the 3 hours. But first, I want to say that I agree with you, Eric. This is a master's class in how to make a movie. As far as cinematography-wise, Roger Ebert hit the nail on the head. This is a movie that should be studied on how to piece movies together, and I think the editing was good here. The reason I say the editing was good, when I'm watching the movie, it never feels like 3 hours. What Stone does amazingly here, on multiple occasions, he builds tension up, and then it's a frantic boom, 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 boom of information, or something happens, and then he lets the temperature go down again. But then he immediately starts to build it back up, and you get another boom, boom, boom full of information. And especially with the scenes around the assassination in Dealey Plaza, I think those are cut so well that it's disorienting, and it's such a rapid pace and rapid cuts. It makes you feel like what somebody who was standing across the street from Dealey Plaza would have felt in those moments right after the shots were fired. It's amazing that he can build that sort of emotion just by how he cuts the movie. So in that case, I think it's really edited really well. And I remember the first time watching the movie, I was so engrossed in the movie, and I was, like I said, I was watching it with my dad. It never felt like 3 hours went by.
It doesn't feel like it's that long when you're watching it. Hell, I mean, you started from A to Z. By the end of it, you're like, it's over? That's it?
Right.
I think it is that long. It does feel long to me. It feels long-winded a little. There's a reason why you had to cut some more stuff out of this, because it was pushing the boundaries big time by the time it got to the 3 hour mark. I do agree with you guys as far as the assassination, being able to go back and forth from old footage to the new filmed footage and stuff, and then not showing at the beginning the actual assassination. We get up to that point and then we hear the shot fired, but we only see the birds up in the sky. I like the fact that we start off not showing the assassination. We hold off to that till later on. It allows you to invest into the beginning of the movie and not focus on the assassination itself.
It would have been real easy to start with the money shot and show the Zapruder film at the beginning of the movie. Ultimately, let's be honest, the only other time that was really seen on TV or in theaters anywhere was on the Geraldo show. He was the first person that got to show the Zapruder film. It had been locked away by Time Life.
And that was what, mid-70s?
No, it would have been after, because it would have been after the House Select Committee.
So about 79?
On assassination.
No, wait, 75, 76.
Yeah, and it wasn't shown on, because it was considered too graphic, plus Americans were not in the mood to see that. And now it's like, I think I had read, outside of stupid crap like YouTube and TikTok, the Zapruder film is like one of the most watched pieces of film in history. It's amazing.
Oh, it's an assassination of a U.S. president.
And one of the most horrific bits of probably ever captured on film. I mean, it's very graphic. Watching that with my dad, and I remember the graphic came up that said that they were going to show it, and if you had a weak stomach, that you should leave the room.
No kidding.
It brings up a lot of emotion for me personally, because I admire John Kennedy a lot. It's never lost its punch, so to speak, for me. It still hits me in the gut when I see that piece of film. I agree with you, Ken. It's real easy to start off with, like I said, the money shot. He builds that tension up. You're wanting to get there, and you want it to, and so he just keeps getting you there.
Like a Jaws moment.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Exactly.
see the shark for the first hour of the movie.
Yeah. You don't want to see the shark.
You think you're going to be ready to see it. You're like, here comes. Nope. He's just playing with my emotion right now.
Yeah.
He's playing with me, and that's a good thing. You want to start off like that. The main problems I have with Oliver Stone in this movie is just the liberties that he's taking with certain characters. A third of these characters don't seem to even exist. We have Mr. X doesn't exist. Kevin Bacon's character doesn't exist. Some of the staff of Jim Garrison's doesn't exist. He didn't have a woman on his payroll, back in the 60s. A lot of these things they're just liberties that are taken. And I understand that certain liberties sometimes have to be taken, but when you're doing a movie, and this is a movie, let's be perfectly frank.
This is not a documentary.
This is not a documentary.
Correct.
But at the same time, it's marketed like a documentary. It is marketed to people to say, hey, there's a conspiracy here, and we have a movie to show you the conspiracy. Let's think about it. It's 1991. We don't have YouTube. We don't have the ability to go out and just look at other documentaries or any information. If we want more information on this, we have to go to a public library to learn more about it, or we have to buy a book. So if we're watching a movie in 1991, guess where our opinions are coming about the assassination of Kennedy? It's coming from this movie.
That's still no excuse, though.
But Oliver Stone also markets this as this is the theory. And we all know Oliver Stone to be somebody who isn't shy about a good conspiracy theory.
Sure.
He's a master of it. But sometimes he takes liberties that make me think, oh, Jim Garrison met with this high official in Washington, and he spilled the beans, and he should have been part of the protection for Kennedy. But really, that person really never existed.
It was almost like a Deep Throat moment in All the President's Men.
You also have Kevin Bacon's character, who is the big supporter that Clay is part of this conspiracy, because he was there. He was there and saw Clay and Oswald. So you have a fictional character telling us, as the audience, that these people knew each other. And I understand that,
it's a movie.
Why are we talking about this movie, though?
Because it's a great movie to talk about.
We already discussed how big this cast is. Kevin Bacon's character, yes, he's a combination of 3 or 4 different witnesses. This is not a courtroom drama movie, but a lot of the dialogue that Kevin Bacon speaks is taken from testimony taken by these witnesses. If we're going to go this route, you complained that it's a 3-hour movie. If we start to go by and have each one of these people, we show each one of these people on the stand, now we're into a different movie. Now you're into a courtroom drama. There's really no drama about the trial of Clay Shaw, other than the fact that Clay Shaw was acquitted. I will give you there are liberties taken. The most gratuitous use of a liberty taken, but it's cinematically awesome, is Kevin Costner's speech as his closing argument, where he perfectly weaves in the magic bullet theory along with the entire conspiracy. And he lays everything out on the line. And this is actually probably one of Kevin Costner's best acting moments, because he actually legitimately did get choked up at the end of his speech. And he begged Oliver Stone not to cut it, because it was real. It was real emotion. That never happened. What that is, it's a combination of a lot of different things that Garrison had said and put into, he's got at least 2 books that I know of about the assassination of President Kennedy. In a sense, I guess, yeah, if you're going to say that he's presenting that as a falsity, it's a falsity in the sense of, like what Eric said, making a movie. And Mr. X may not have been one person, but here again, Oliver Stone had people that were associated with the government, if you believe Oliver Stone, who came to him anonymously and dropped hints. And Mr. X is basically, it's based off of the man who was the technical advisor for the movie. He was a government higher up at the time that Kennedy was assassinated. If every single person has their own character, now you're at a 4-hour movie.
And a lot more people to try and keep
and
track of.
a lot more people to...
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why tries to do too much. I think it would be better served on focusing on, let's say, Shaw and his group of people that are around him, but they're going all over the place. They're trying to tell us about the CIA being involved and Oswald. And I think what happens here is that we're stretched in so many different areas that I think it would be better served if we would have focused on one thing. I mean, we watched documentaries about the JFK assassination that it's not 3 hours long.
Ken, I think that's done on purpose, actually. I think Oliver Stone purposely sends you down multiple rabbit holes, multiple directions, just as any good director is going to do, to get you to think about alternative theories, whether they're right or wrong. He's getting you thinking, hey, is it the mob? Is it the Cubans? Is it the Russians? Is it the CIA? Is it Johnson? Right. There are so many different options, and he's kind of wetting the palate of getting you to think about that. So I think he does that on purpose, and I actually think he does it really well.
I think he could also do it from the other side, because the way he plays this movie off is Oswald didn't even shoot the gun. He wasn't even there to shoot the gun. That he was just a patsy, and that's it. So if he's showing all these different angles, the one angle that he's not showing that to give it any type of credible belief is what the media and what the Warren Commission basically came up with. And I'm not saying the Warren Commission is correct, because I believe there's some problems with that Warren Commission, and we'll talk about that towards the end here. Right. But Oliver Stone does not make any case for Oswald to actually even be part of this assassination, as far as shooting the gun, at least.
No. He puts him in the planning stages of this whole thing. He's knee deep in everything.
They're literally
there,
taken into like the escape route.
He basically takes Oswald at his word. Oswald's words inside the Dallas Police Department was, "I'm a patsy." So Oliver Stone's taking him at his word. He's filling in the blanks. Let's be perfectly honest. The U.S. government created this knowledge vacuum by closing off the records from the House Select Committee for 75 years. Or not for at that time, because then that was in the mid-70s. The Garrison trial was before that. We weren't supposed to have access to any of these papers that the House Select Committee on Assassinations that deemed there was a conspiracy. They put all of that stuff on lockdown and created this knowledge vacuum that in the subsequent years had been filled by Phil Donahue and the host of people that tried to copy Phil Donahue. And Eric, our friend, Art Bell on Coast to Coast. If you want to talk conspiracy theories, this is how they were born, is by not releasing the stuff and not releasing the information.
And this is all, of course, pre-internet. Obviously, with the internet, conspiracy theories can be deemed on any subject you name, because everyone is just releasing true, false, just weird-ass information. But this is all stuff that's locked up in safes that maybe we will get to know someday. Then again, maybe we won't.
Somebody will probably push it out even further and further and further. I mean, they did recently just release more documents, but they really didn't shed any more light.
Trump released some. And I know Biden was looking into some to release some.
He did a few months back. He actually released some.
There's still too much national security risk on releasing some of these documents. You're creating an environment that's going to foster these conspiracy theories. Here's the thing. The government was never going to be honest about what happened to John Kennedy, because it couldn't be.
Why is that, Ted? Why can't they be honest?
It's either a conspiracy or it's one of the largest brain fart, incompetent moments by the security officials in the history of America, outside of Abe Lincoln going to Ford's Theater and not having anybody guard the door. They're going to have to admit one of two things: that we were so grossly incompetent that we allowed somebody to kill the president, or there's a conspiracy that we may or may not be involved with. Either way, the government looks like idiots. So they're never going to be able to come out and tell the truth. So what they did was they compiled whatever that thing was that called the Warren Commission report. It was an absolute joke.
Thinking that Americans are complete morons and will believe anything that the government tells them, which in that era, a lot of people would believe anything.
And that's what Mr. X, you said exactly what Mr. X says. I don't blame Oliver Stone here for taking some liberties. I think Eric hits the nail on the head perfectly. He's whetting the palate to have people who think that Oswald did it, to provide little bits of information, to have people start to look at something from a different point of view. And he does it here. He's immensely successful at it.
He is, but I mean, some of it is based off of just pure lying. I mean, for instance, the David Ferrie character. He never met with them and told them that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy. That never happened. And even Garrison even says, yeah, that never happened. This is another thing where Oliver Stone makes you believe that there's a conspiracy because he made that up. In fact,
that's just great filmmaking.
But before Ferrie died, he even said that he had no part.
But here's the thing. He gets David Ferrie's name out there. And then when you start to look at other conspiracies of the 20th century that involve the CIA, David Ferrie's name keeps coming up into the even though he's been dead, his name starts to be being part of the Civil Air Corps as part of the Civil Air Patrol. That is a precursor to Air America in the 1980s, which was the smuggling of cocaine in from Colombia. So David Ferrie, yeah, he may not be used there, but this is a man who a movie could have been made about his life, immensely interesting, but not known to the average American. But now his name's out there, and people are going to look at David Ferrie and think, what is his connection here? It's a lot deeper than what people thought.
How is his name out there? Here's my
because of Oliver Stone.
Because of Oliver Stone? Because Ferrie died by supposedly suicide, right? But in the movie, it looks like somebody actually killed him. They make it look like that it's very possible that he didn't want to die, so why would he commit suicide? If he didn't, in real life, confess that there was this talk about an assassination of the president, does Garrison's office leak that they're talking about him, and that's how he gets killed, is because they threw his name out there. We see the scene where Joe Pesci is, on the phone, and he's beating that phone up against...
It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma.
Right, exactly. But but what I'm trying to say here is it is a movie, but I think what my problem with it is that Oliver Stone markets it like it's a documentary.
I don't think that he does.
I don't think he does either.
He still does to this day.
No,
I think the
American people and the American media marked it, quote unquote, as a documentary. Okay, and Oliver Stone's like, well, we'll just let the momentum roll a little bit because any publicity is good publicity when a movie's released. Right. Hey, you want to give me controversy? Let's make $400 million. Let's call it a day. But I don't think he marketed this thing as a documentary.
It does what he wanted it to do. This is a gateway drug into the land of outside of the box thinking.
Guys, I'm looking at a 1991 Washington Post interview here about the movie. I want to read one quick point. The writer says, Oliver Stone's barely factual retelling of prosecutors' effort to prove the CIA killed Kennedy grossed hundreds of millions of dollars and pushed Congress to order the release of nearly all assassination documents, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we know that. So when they asked him about it, in his defense, Oliver Stone never claimed the film he directed and co-wrote was truth. Quote, it is not a true story per se, he told the New York Times a few months before it was released in 1991. It explores all the possible scenarios of why Kennedy was killed, who killed him, and why. He's just giving you all the avenues and letting
I remember him saying these sort of things as well.
Right, but he's also using lies.
Liberties.
Isn't liberties talking about Ferrie's character confessing that he was a part of a conspiracy to kill the president? Is that line when Ferrie has never said that?
It's a movie.
Oliver Stone was actually asked to come to Congress to testify.
Because everyone was losing their shit over
everybody wanted his lies.
No,
man.
that's
Everyone
not
was
why
going
he went to
apeshit
Congress.
over this movie. He
That is
awakened
not why he went
America's
to Congress.
interest in this movie. He was not subpoenaed by Congress for perjury or for lying.
He went to Congress because the people revolted over this movie. And they called and demanded that their senators and their representatives release information that was not scheduled to be released until we're right in the
37
window.
or something.
Like 2037.
It was up there.
All of those things were locked under key, and people demanded, based off of his movie, that these documents should be released. He's solely responsible for the increase of interest into the JFK assassination and opening people's minds into a grander idea that, hey, the Warren Report is not worth the paper it's written on. You know what the best use of the Warren Report would be? Is to take it back into the John and use it to wipe your butt with.
All
There's
26 volumes of it.
There's not a single ounce of truth in that in any of the 26 volumes. It's all baloney. And
Not
the
a
bottom
single
line,
ounce of truth at all.
No, there's not.
Everybody in the Warren Commission lied.
Yes.
Kennedy was never assassinated then. Oswald was never part of this assassination process. Oswald didn't do any of these things that were accusing him of.
Okay, no, seriously.
You know what I'm talking about.
Allen Dulles and John F. Kennedy hated each other.
I get that.
Kennedy
I understand.
fired Dulles. Okay.
I get that.
Kennedy
And
said
all the generals.
that he was going to break the CIA into a million little pieces and scatter them to the wind.
And don't get me wrong, I agree with you to a certain extent that the Warren Commission is wrong. There are some inconsistencies. There should have been some acknowledgement that we messed up as a country protecting our president, and they were covering their butts. I get that. I understand that. But you haven't even told me yet why Oliver Stone, a filmmaker, is on Capitol Hill.
He is acting as a conduit for the people. They asked him to come to speak before the Senate, I don't know if it was the Senate or House subcommittee. They asked him the questions about why he made the movie. He told them that the American people have a right to know that those documents that they have under lock and key, these are our documents, not the government's documents. Those are our documents, and we have a right to know what happened to the president. That's why he was in Congress.
He's
not
a
because he
filmmaker.
lied.
He's a filmmaker, though. I'm not saying this because he lied.
This movie did exactly what it was supposed to do. It took on a life of its own outside of what Oliver Stone created it for. This was a wake-up call to the American people, and it worked. That's why Oliver Stone ended up on Capitol Hill, because it did work. And the people demanded information, and they demanded that they release information.
And I'm sure they wanted to know where Oliver Stone got some of his liberties and information from.
That's where I'm coming from.
Some of his stuff is probably pretty dead on in the big
some
picture.
of his stuff. I'm not saying all of his stuff is lies. I'm saying he mixes truth with fairy tale to get his point across. That's what I've been saying.
Liberties.
There, you can call them liberties. I'll call them fairy tales. But why doesn't the commission in 78? Why doesn't that give a wake-up call to America? Because that's where we realize that there were some problems here with the Warren Commission.
Because no one in the late 70s is paying attention to anything that's going on that's not affecting them. But when you have a major motion picture release that is broadcast all over the TV and the newspapers, you're reading in Time magazine about how Oliver Stone is treading on the name of JFK and this is a horrible movie. And now you're like, oh, I think I'll read this article. What's going on here?
The temperature in America in the 1970s, you have to understand and put it into context. Even though the House Select Committee on Assassinations, I think it was 75, 76, 77, somewhere in that vicinity, there had not been enough time passed. The country was still grieving over what happened to John Kennedy. It so shook people. Also, too, America was still reeling from everything that happened in Vietnam. The people weren't ready.
Watergate, Vietnam.
Watergate.
Yeah.
Just go down the line, man. Watergate was a game changer as well. The trust of the American government had never been lower. The people were in no frame of mind to have any of this be out. But now, in 1991, when Oliver Stone releases this, we're 28 years out from the assassination. People have started to recover from Vietnam and everything of that nature. And
you also have a second generation after that.
Exactly.
And you also have a lot of people that are now gone, that are dead, that can't verify half of the stuff that we're going to be putting into this movie.
And that's another thing that the government was planning on, and why they haven't released all of the information, because some of those people are still alive.
Right,
and
I understand that, yeah.
The bottom line is some of this stuff, had it been released, they would have hung some of these people from light posts because of how some of the shady crap that they did. I guarantee you what, I know this for a fact, that had JFK not had come out right after Allen Dulles died, there would not be an airport in Washington, D.C. named after that piece of crap.
Here's one more thing that I'm going to throw at Oliver Stone here, and then maybe I'll lay off of him a little bit. But my problems with how he shows Clay Shaw. Now, I believe Clay Shaw to be a liar.
The judge that oversaw the trial, he says he guarantees that Clay Shaw was lying on the stand.
And I understand that. But the way the movie presents itself is, hey, Clay Shaw is a homosexual. And because he's a homosexual and has a certain lifestyle, he isn't to be trusted. That's how I feel like it comes across in this movie. There's no reason to show Tommy Lee Jones painted in gold, first of all, and doing some crazy stuff with Kevin Bacon and Joe Pesci. That is not necessary. And it always comes back to Liz Garrison, who basically says to Garrison, you're only going after him because he's a homosexual? And I almost feel like there's a little bit of truth in that based on how Oliver Stone represents Clay Shaw.
I didn't get that at all.
This is a double-edged sword as well, because we're talking about Louisiana in the early 1970s. This is not
60s?
This is not the 60s. Yeah. So we're not talking about San Francisco. Stonewall hadn't happened yet. If you were gay, you were looked at as not being trustworthy. And I think that Oliver Stone does a very good way of showing how accurate that people's viewpoints of somebody who was gay was. Do I think Jim Garrison attacked Clay Shaw because he was gay? No, but it didn't help Clay Shaw any that he was. And Jim Garrison is actually kind of a jerk because he outed him. You have to take into consideration, too, the time in which Oliver Stone's showing was not a gay-friendly time. We're talking as far deep south as you can possibly go.
And I'm not accusing Oliver Stone of bashing homosexuals. But at the same time, when I see that scene, is Oliver Stone telling me that Clay is bad because he's a homosexual? Or is he telling me that it's awkward for Clay because of the fact that he's a homosexual? It feels more to me that he is showing his underground sexual activities as another reason why he can't be trusted. And that, to me, is a little bothersome.
We mentioned the Sissy Spacek comment. This sort of argument can be used to discredit Jim Garrison, too. And that's essentially what the Sissy Spacek character's doing, is because that was another criticism that was brought up of Jim Garrison at the time, was that he was doing it just because he was gay. Oliver Stone has to present both sides of this coin, and it's a very fine line that he has to walk. He can't sit there and post and put out there the exact, newspaper quotes or what people were saying.
But does he have to have that
would be
scene
unfair.
in there?
Where
I'm
she
talking
says
about, no, I'm talking about the scene with him and Kevin Bacon and Joe Pesci. They're doing some kind of strange sexual act together. Does that actually have to be there? And my opinion is no. The only reason to put that in there is to downgrade Clay Shaw.
That's part of the movie. I think that it doesn't help Clay Shaw's character.
Does it downgrade Willie O'Keefe? Does it downgrade
this is a guy
Pesci's
who was
character?
already...
I think it only goes after Clay Shaw, because don't forget, when we're watching this, I believe we're watching this during the trial.
It's when Willie O'Keefe is
He's giving
his
his
deposition.
testimony-
He's giving his deposition
at the
in
prison.
Angola. Yeah.
Right, but it's still aimed at Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw is the bad guy here. Nobody else is really being pointed out as being the bad guy because, well, we need the trial later on. We need something to wrap this up with a bow. And so Clay Shaw is the guy we have to go after to bring out this conspiracy. And the Warren Commission didn't do their job, so who are we going to go after? Let's go after Clay Shaw so we can get all the information out. That's what it appears.
Is Clay Shaw a patsy?
To a certain extent, I think he is. Was he involved? There's a possibility that he was involved. I'm not going to say he wasn't. Did Garrison use him to probably get this information out to try to bring
Damn straight he did.
the assassination to light? Yes.
And Garrison said that he would do it again.
Yeah, it makes me question Garrison a little bit.
He ended up becoming a judge, but he lost his next election. You know who he lost his election to? Harry Connick Jr.'s dad. Wow, you want to talk about a real piece of work. He sent more
Is he
people
literally like Foghorn Leghorn?
He sent more people to the electric chair than any other DA, and not a good person.
I will say this really quick for you guys, because I've been bashing Oliver Stone, and some of the points you guys have made are really good points. I do agree that Oliver Stone did a great job at making someone like me interested in the assassination. Because whenever something came out during that time frame, like a documentary, I'm there watching it. I probably
and there were a lot of them.
There were tons.
Yes.
There were tons of them. Even now, when we are watching this movie for the podcast, I've watched probably 4 documentaries on the JFK assassination. There's part of me that's actually disappointed that we're actually finishing up our podcast here because I have to move on. I can't stick in. My wife actually goes, "Are you going to watch our show together?" "No, I'm watching JFK." "You've already watched JFK." I go, "No, I was watching the documentary in between."
He's turned into Jim Garrison reading books in bed about it, right?
Exactly.
Damn it, Sherry, can't you see?
What about the kids? The kids, they miss you. They miss their dad.
The dogs don't even know who you are anymore.
Over the years, whether it be the National Geographic Channel or the History Channel or
Frontline or any of them that come up.
Frontline, anytime that anything's there,
I'm glued to it.
Right, I'm right on it. The shows that try to prove that Oswald was the lone gunman, I've watched.
Or where they shoot the bullet
everything.
into like Jello and stuff.
I've seen more Jello being penetrated by a bullet than I can imagine.
I don't know if the word penetrate is the right word, but anyway,
I don't know,
shot
man.
into whatever. This movie was the gateway into everything.
We can talk moon landings till we're blue in the face, but this is the one that everyone has an opinion on.
Right. It doesn't matter when you were born either. None of us were born at that particular time. I will tell you this. Showtime came up with a mock trial in the mid-'80s where they actually got these prosecutors and attorneys. I think the prosecutor was the one that went after Charles Manson, and the
Vincent
defendant...
Bugliosi. After he wrote Helter Skelter, made his millions off of the name of Charles Manson, he then wrote what is considered the definitive novel to debunk every conspiracy of the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
In the mid-'80s, I'm invested as a 13, 14-year-old boy in watching this trial about something that happened to President Kennedy 20-something years earlier. This has always been there for us to debate. And
you were just waiting for the Red Shoe Diaries to come on.
Yeah,
on Showtime.
I don't think it was out in 85, 86, somewhere around there. But we're going to be talking about this 20, 30 years down the road more and more. I mean, we still talk about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. There's something about that just draws us in. I mean, we actually had our own type of JFK situation when 9/11 happened with the planes and the towers coming down. All the conspiracy theories about what happened to the towers. Was it set off? Was there something underneath the towers that somebody clicked a button and allowed them both to come down? There's all these conspiracies.
This is the conspiracy theory that leads you into every one of these ones that we've just mentioned, whether it be the moon landing, whether it be did FDR allow Pearl Harbor to happen, what happened on 9/11. This is where it begins. the government had to admit that there was a conspiracy.
You know what also begins here? Gary Oldman's career basically begins right here. It's
Gary
amazing.
Oldman's awesome.
It's amazing at what kind of actor he is because he disappears. As Eric said earlier, he doesn't know where the actor is and where the real life Oswald, we just don't know because he blends in so well. And that says so much about his acting. Ullman doesn't really have to say much throughout this movie. It's more of his mannerisms. It's just the way he walks. He looks like Oswald. What is interesting is this could have been a typecast movie for Gary Oldman, but it doesn't happen that way. He turns out this wonderful career. So I just wanted to point out this because we hadn't talked about Oldman at all in this movie because we've been so stuck on conspiracy theories, and we kind of figured we were going to go there, right? Like I said, I really enjoyed the acting from most of these people. I know Ted talked about Brian Doyle Murray as Jack Ruby. I would have liked to know a little bit more about Jack Ruby in this movie. I don't think.
What do you want to know?
What do I?
Yeah.
I
Don't get him started. Don't do it.
I know there's a movie out called Ruby, so I know that there's that. But he killed Oswald. That's kind of like a big thing
On live television.
Live television.
Exactly. That was the moment the conspiracy was born.
Right.
When they bring him out and Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, and so there's no trial, there's nothing. And that's where this vacuum of information is filled in by people filling it in themselves. Live on TV.
Can you imagine
holy
seeing
crap,
that?
man. I mean, this is things that traumatized my parents, at least. I mean, they watched a guy get gunned down live on TV.
You know that a lot of people had to be watching this because that weekend, everybody stuck to the TV set to find out more and more about this Oswald guy.
You ask anyone of this era where they were when Kennedy was shot, they can tell you.
People just kept leaving their TVs on. They didn't know what was going to happen next. It's a very scary thing.
Stone really tapped in with this movie. I don't know how long he was working on this movie. I'm assuming a couple years prior, trying to get all the characters and everything together. But I don't know if in the past, if any other directors were trying to put a movie of similar stature together.
Not really. Nobody wanted to tackle...
It's pretty ballsy.
Nobody wanted to tackle this.
And that's why everyone turned on him so ferociously.
Yeah. And Oliver Stone has paid the price.
Yeah.
And Emilio Estevez, he tackled the Bobby Kennedy shooting. That's another movie where you're going to have a lot of stars. A JFK wannabe movie, it doesn't succeed like JFK does, but there's a lot of stars in that.
One thing that we didn't talk about, which I think is just kind of like so ironic, it plays out. I didn't even realize it the first time I watched it. I had someone tell me it. That opening scene, who narrates it?
Martin
Sheen. How about that? Mr.
plays
Kennedy in every role he's ever done.
Yeah.
Martin Sheen was the perfect narrator.
Really amazing. Nobody wanted to tackle this as a subject. It's like when we talked about Full Metal Jacket. Nobody wanted to tackle Vietnam because you could make the argument that the wound of some of the stuff that happened in the 60s has never fully healed. It started with JFK, and then you have Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated, you have Malcolm X assassinated, you have Bobby Kennedy assassinated, and you have Fred Hampton murdered in Chicago. Anybody who stepped up to be any sort of a leader got gunned down. A lot of it in cold blood, in public. There's no denying, or there's no reason you can't look at what happened at the 1968 Democratic Convention and the outpouring of anger and everything that came during those times. That was going to happen because people didn't have answers and people were angry. It was a powder keg.
I would at least disagree with you on the Full Metal Jacket. There was movies made about the Vietnam War before Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah,
Platoon came out a year before that.
Well, yeah, that was around the time, though, like we had discussed, it was starting to be able to be done. The only legitimate movie that was before Platoon and Full Metal Jacket about Vietnam was...
Apocalypse Now, right?
Well, there was Apocalypse Now, but then there was The Deer Hunter. And those two movies kind of signaled the end for any talking about Vietnam for a long time. I mean, and then of course you had a whole host of them. You had Platoon, you had Full Metal Jacket, you had Hamburger Hill, Born on the 4th of July.
It got a little too oversaturated at that point. But I will say this about, because you're mentioning about 68, the Democratic Convention and things of that nature. The 60s is a point of where we make a turn with media. More things are broadcast live. That's why we saw Bobby Kennedy get killed on live TV. That's why we see so many different
the Vietnam
things.
War being televised.
Vietnam War.
Uncensored.
The American public had more of opinion because it was thrown into their face. They could see it now. Whereas when you have World War II or the Korean War, that feels far away. We know that we're in a war, but it's not at your front doorstep, where the TV made it so that everything was at your front doorstep. You are more invested now than ever. And the young adult community took that, because who was watching the most TV at that time? Teenagers and people in their 20s.
Yeah, I mean, World War II, it was sanitized with the lens of the newspaper or sanitized through the lens of the radio.
They were all propaganda films, a lot of them, too.
Right.
Go to the movies.
Yeah.
With, the things that
The
they
movie,
showed at the
movie
theater.
reels.
Yes.
Yeah, those are very propaganda friendly.
Very produced, too.
Oh, very much so. Frank Sinatra releasing singles
Yeah.
about during World War II.
JFK connection there. Frank Sinatra,
Well, I was
JFK,
I was just...
and the mob.
I actually didn't mean to make that connection there, but
you
yeah, I mean, you had people like that. They were releasing singles and stuff like that. The assassination of Kennedy was the start of the distrust of the American government, and it culminated in Watergate. That was the final nail in the coffin of government believability.
So this movie did quite well at the Academy Awards in 1992. It was nominated for several Academy Awards, actually. It was nominated and won for Best Cinematography. It won for Best Film Editing. Oliver Stone was nominated for Best Director. Tommy Lee Jones was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And, of course, it was nominated for Best Picture, losing to Silence of the Lambs. What's your thoughts on that, Ted?
Silence of the Lambs is one of my favorite movies of all time. So
I think it's good, but I think it's
tough,
overrated. I mean, maybe we'll review that one day.
It was a good year for movies, though. I think if Silence of the Lambs is not here, JFK probably wins. The awards that it won for cinematography and editing, I think we discussed that those were two of the major highlights of the movie. After this, Oliver Stone, he's taken a lot of arrows from a lot of people, and the Academy's one of them, who's kind of blackballed him. None of his other movies have ever really been nominated for anything. He's not been nominated for anything. He's almost become a punchline for a lot of people in Hollywood, which is quite unfortunate because he is a really good director. He's not afraid to put himself out there. I think JFK is a personal movie for him, but I think his most personal movie is Platoon by far. It won for what it should have won. If it hadn't won those two, that would have been not right.
We all know that Oliver Stone takes this movie personally. He just came out last year with JFK Revisited, which I think we've all seen. That is a legitimate 2-hour documentary based on added information, opinions of experts on the JFK assassination. I have recently heard Oliver Stone last year on...
Joe Rogan's?
Joe Rogan, thank you. 2 hours on Joe Rogan about this. So this is definitely something that is deep to his heart. And you're absolutely right. After this, man, he really didn't do anything, did he? He was blacklisted.
I don't know if he was blacklisted. I don't think his movies are as good after this movie. Not saying that they're bad movies. I just don't think they're at the level of JFK. And I know I've been ripping on this movie a little bit, but actually I enjoy this movie. But one of the things, if we're talking about the Academy Awards that I think is a crying shame, is the fact that Tommy Lee Jones doesn't win for Best Supporting Actor, that Jack Palance wins for City Slickers. And I think that happens because they're just giving out an award to somebody who's been in the business for a very long time.
3 words. Lifetime Achievement Award.
Right.
So they
I thought you were going to say
real...
one-handed push-ups or something like that.
They gave him a real Oscar instead of the honorary Oscar.
Yeah. Now, if we were talking about movies that should have won for Best Picture, one other movie besides Silence of the Lambs that I thought should have given it a run for its money, Boys in the Hood. If you want to talk about a movie that's powerful, Boys in the Hood should have been nominated and maybe should have won.
Did John Singleton win Best Director?
That actually went to Jonathan Demme for The Silence of the Lambs.
But
But he was
that's
nominated.
too bad. That's an amazing movie as well. I have a lot of opinions about Boys in the Hood.
Amazingly enough, nobody was nominated as far as acting-wise for
That's
Boys
wrong.
in the Hood, which I think is wrong, too.
Probably Cuba Gooding Jr.'s best role.
I mean, for crying out loud, Robert De Niro got nominated for Cape Fear, and I love Robert De Niro, don't get me wrong, but not for Cape Fear.
Not for Cape Fear.
I mean, that could have easily gone to somebody else. I think Tommy Lee Jones. I love his facial mannerisms in this movie. They are they're so good. I believe that he's basically playing this character. I'm happy they got nominated, but looking over the people that actually got nominated for Best Supporting Actor, Ben Kingsley, Harvey Keitel, Michael...
Harvey Keitel for the piano?
No, Harvey Keitel for Bugsy.
Yeah, Bugsy.
Oh, that's right.
Which
Yeah.
that's a little bit of an overrated movie and got a lot of people.
Oh no,
got
that movie
nominated.
sucks. I don't know. That movie blows.
Yeah, again,
You want to talk about boring. It's
Yeah,
not exciting at all.
yeah. Ben Kingsley was in that movie too, and he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor.
From Bugsy?
It
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
darling movie
It was
by
a
the
double?
Academy.
Oh, I know. I remember it was.
Yeah.
And I seen it. It's boring as hell.
Yeah,
It's kind of like Shakespeare in Love beating out.
right.
It's not quite that bad, but it would have been had Bugsy won Best Picture.
Well, we're gonna wrap this up, and we've decided, we've taken a poll here amongst the boys, and we are gonna give kind of like a synopsis of what our opinion is of the conspiracy or the Kennedy assassination, and then we'll go into our reviews. So, Ken, let's kick it off with you.
Is there a conspiracy? Maybe so. Was there negligence on our government? Definitely so. The Warren Commission didn't do their job. They didn't do enough. They zipped right through this, and there was things that were at least missed. You could either say they were incompetent, or they were covering something up, or both. I believe Lee Harvey Oswald was involved in the shooting in some type of way. Did he actually fire a gun? Very convenient for you to shoot the gun, leave the gun on the floor with the shell casings. Granted, you put it on the other side of the floor, but you don't think anybody's going to find it? There does seem to be some type of setup here. So I do believe that there is some type of conspiracy here. Who did it is beyond me. I don't know if it was the Russians or if it was Cuba, if Fidel Castro, if it was the mafia, it was Johnson, it was the CIA, if it was little Debbie snack cakes. I don't know who did it. I just know that something doesn't smell right here.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Ken. Well, I have some pretty strong opinions on this one, and I'll try and keep it wrapped into an enigma, if you will, for a minute or two. In watching this movie, in watching the numerous documentaries, in the many books I've read, I have been obsessed with this assassination for decades. And anyone who knows me knows I am extremely fascinated with conspiracy theories. Everything from Kennedy to the moon landing to everything. I'm all over the place. I find them extremely fascinating. In this case, I'm going along with Oliver Stone on many of his theories. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, with a Jonestown reference there. I adamantly believe that this is not a conspiracy. This is an outright coup d'etat. This is an assassination by our government, whether it be the CIA, whether it be the generals, whether it be everyone affiliated with Lyndon Johnson and his administration. Kennedy was not liked. He didn't play ball, and they killed him. How else can you explain a cover-up that has lasted this long without blatant facts? There's no way the mob could have done this on their own. There's no way the Cubans could have done this. There's no way Snoopy could have done this, Little Debbie, anyone. This is such a secret that has been held together for half a century, and we are still guessing. It has to be internal. And just look at the outcome. I mean, we all know the facts are Kennedy wanted out of Vietnam. We all heard Eisenhower's speech when he left office about the military-industrial complex. And boy, did that thing come true, and it is true as today as it ever has been. Now I'm probably targeted. I'm on the list. Maybe I'll be dead in a week. Who knows? Keep your eye on me. But that's how I feel about it. Ted, take us home in this one.
I've been trying to think of how to put into words. Eric, you said a lot of things that I completely agree with you. There's no coincidence that this movie starts out with the speech, one of the most important speeches of the 20th century, which is the speech given by Dwight Eisenhower as he's leaving office, warning America of the military-industrial complex. John Kennedy made too many enemies. There was too many people that wanted his blood. Once he got elected, he turned his brother on to Jimmy Hoffa and the Chicago mob and the mob in general, who, by all accounts, probably got him elected. And he made enemies of the CIA. If you want a history of the CIA and the mob, you don't need to look any further than Cuba. The mob taught the CIA how to launder money through casinos. Kennedy had to die, is essentially, I agree with Eric. This is a coup d'etat. Except in this case, power was given over to an elected official rather than a general. This was meant to make an example to every president afterwards of this is what we will do to you. I think that threat is still made to the presidents today, and why you see a different person that comes into the office than when they were on the election trail. This was a conspiracy. This is not a conspiracy theory, in my opinion, and something like 3 out of 4 Americans believe in a conspiracy. This is as close to a conspiracy fact as we have. Was Lee Harvey Oswald there? Probably. He was a bagman. One of the most interesting theories, and this is how I'll end it, is involving another actor. There's an infamous picture taken of 3 men called the Tramps. And these were 3 men who were detained by Dallas Police Department and were considered transients and were released and never really questioned. However, when you look at the picture of them, they're clean cut and they don't look like hobos. The tie to one of an actor is Woody Harrelson's dad was a contract killer. And it's been connected that Woody Harrelson's dad was in Dallas that day. And supposedly there was an artist who does facial recognition artistry professionally for like the FBI and everything. And she says that the one hobo, she said something like 85% sure that it was Woody Harrelson's dad. So that's pretty interesting. It's one of the darkest moments in American history.
How ironic that Oliver Stone does Natural Born Killers just a couple years later.
Yes,
with Woody Harrelson. Yay. All right. Well, thank you, Ted. We'll go into our reviews here. Ken, why don't you start us off on your review of JFK the movie?
So JFK the movie is a good movie. Great cinematography. I love the acting here from most of the actors, with the exception, I still don't think I like Costner here, but maybe Costner did a good job. Maybe it's just Garrison that's just flat. Pesci is basically the same character that he played in Lethal Weapon 2. It didn't bring anything more to the table for me. My problem with movies that are like this, when I find out certain things about a movie are not true and that they're used for effect and not to back up the story, it bothers me a little bit. I've always had problems with, and this is more with when it comes to cases of movies that are biographical or based on a true story, like Remember the Titans, where I find out later that half the stuff that's in the movie didn't really happen, that it was put into that movie for us to be led somewhere. And that frustrates me, because I think before I knew all that, this movie would have probably been graded a little higher for me. But it's still a good movie. I still enjoy it. I'll watch it again. I own it. I haven't watched it in a number of years, but it will be something I will watch again in the future because it's interesting. The guys are right about one thing, is that he does make it interesting and makes me ask questions and makes me look at it from different angles and makes me go do some more research on it. On that note, this movie is a solid B.
All right. Thank you, Ken. So I'm going to make my review short and sweet. This is a top 5 movie for me. I love this movie. I love everything about this movie. I wish this movie was 4 or 5 hours long. That's how much I love this movie. It is an A+. Ted, what do you got?
It's no secret after 60-some episodes. Movies that make me think and make me want to discuss things, especially with my friends. That's my wheelhouse. And this is a movie
You're talking
that
about
does
us, right? Your friends?
Exactly.
Okay, I just want to
Yes,
make sure.
exactly.
Okay.
I didn't get the check yet, though, by the way.
I think one of the, as far as something like that, one of my most fun times of doing the whole podcast was discussing 2001. That's something that I thoroughly enjoy doing, and I hope that comes through the podcast. But this is JFK's another one of those instances where I love the discussion. This movie opened up so many things for me as far as my mind goes. Even being young when I seen it, it made me start to question things and be more inquisitive. That's why if I sounded passionate earlier in the podcast, that's why, because this movie opened my eyes to things and to question what authority is telling you, that they may not be telling you the truth. And I credit my parents for allowing that to grow in me. And then a lot of it comes out of this movie. As far as cinematography wise, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I think this is one of Kevin Costner's great roles. I think this is one of his greatest roles. I mean, it's better than the movie that he won Best Picture for, which was Dances with Wolves. This is a top 25 movie for me, hands down. I love this movie. This is a movie that I usually watch at least once a year. So it's a solid A for me. There's very few things that I don't care for in this movie. Probably the only thing is some of the heavy-handedness with this family. That was probably the lowest part of the movie for me. It's just a wonderful movie.
So overall, we all like it. No one hates it. That's good. So, all right. All right, Ted. Well, where can they find us on Twitter?
We can be found on Twitter at hookedon_movies.
Wonderful. And Ken, Facebook.
Well, you could join us on Facebook, Hooked on Movies. Join in the discussion. Tell us what you think of JFK. What's your opinion? Do you believe that there was conspiracy? Do you believe in Ted? Do you believe in Eric? Or are you smart and agree with me? That's the question here. But feel free to go ahead on our Facebook page and give us your opinion. Not only on this movie, but on the tons of movies we've already done and the tons of movies we're going to do in the future.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And our next movie we're going to be doing is All the President's Men. We are continuing the political scenarios. Some would say conspiracy theory, but I don't think you can call Watergate a conspiracy theory unless you're Richard Nixon. Then you might think it's a conspiracy. We're looking forward to that one. So if you haven't seen it, go out, download it, rent it, watch it, enjoy it, and we will see you down the road, folks. I'm not wearing any pants. Film at 11.
See you at the movies.
See you next time on Hooked on Movies.